Welcome to the WARC Podcast. I'm Anne-Marie Kerwin, America's editor, and this week, WARC released its annual Future of Strategy report, which is based on a global survey that we've been conducting over the last decade. And this podcast is just one in a series where we'll be talking about the Future of Strategy 2025. So, what does this year's survey tell us? Let's just say the 2020s are shaping up to be a survival test for strategy itself. Today, we're diving deep into the evolving skill set of the strategist, a role that is increasingly critical yet faces significant challenges.
Do you want to learn from the best and set yourself up to win in 2026? The Most Contagious event in London is here to show you how. Pack a year's worth of marketing smarts into just one day on December 2nd at London's South Bank Centre. You'll see behind the scenes of 2025's most innovative campaigns, hear the stories no case study reveals, and grab the insights you need to make better, braver work. Tickets are now on sale at mostcontagious.com. Don't miss out.
So today I'm joined by three fabulous strategist brains who we're going to talk to about what we found out for the Future of Strategy 2025. First up, I have Joe Burns, who's the strategy lead at Agency Quality Meets. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Anne-Marie.
Thanks for being here. Next up, I have Tomas Gonsorcik, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at DDB Worldwide. Hello, Tomas.
Hi, Anne-Marie. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's so good you're here. And lastly, we have Elizabeth Paul, who's the Chief Strategy Officer for the Martin Agency. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hi, excited to be here.
So thank you all for joining me. I wanted to start with just some findings from the WARC survey that we did. And there's a clear trend of strategists spending less time on upstream business problems compared to past years. And there's more downstream execution going on. And then also this survey tracked that there's a declining influence in strategic planning, both on the client side and within the agency. So, Tomas, I was just wondering, does any of this sound familiar to you? Has this something that you've recognized within your agency as trends going on, or what have you seen?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, not only have we experienced the issue across our agencies, but I think the data speaks for itself. As your report indicated, not only last year, but maybe 2 or 3 years ago, the confidence in strategists' ability to influence the agency and influence clients was in high 60s, kind of low 70s. I think people were generally, optimistic and confident in what they do. And I think when we look at this year's report, we're looking at kind of high 30s, right, into percentage counts. I think the decline is fairly significant. Now, what I find fascinating is in speaking with CMOs, with search consultants, with agency search consultants in particular, when asked the question, where do you think agency CEOs should be spending their money? Universal answer is strategy. And I believe they're not telling me this just because I'm a planner and they want to be nice to me, but I think I truly believe them when they say this. So I think we have I think it's not a blip, it's a market fit problem, where on one hand, the market is demanding more strategy, more high-end strategy, and our people are feeling like they matter less and less. And I think the way I see it, I think we need to rebrand strategy more as a service, less of a kind of back office input into the creative process. And I think we can be onto something, but the problem certainly exists.
I'm curious, when you hear that, Tomas, do you think the problem is strategy or strategists? And I ask, knowing that is semantic, but when you hear a stat like the overwhelming number of CEOs who say we need more strategy, and yet you see a 50% drop in kind of the confidence and feeling of being essential among strategists, that could be a market misfit, but it also begs the question, where are we spending our time? And are we spending our time on the right things? I know the core of the question was about upstream business planning, less of that and more time on execution. I would actually argue that strategists are spending less time on everything. Certainly, we're all running after the tyranny of the urgent. And in some ways, I think that is true at agencies mirroring what's happening inside a lot of client and marketing organizations. But I also think, not to start on a grim note, I think strategists are in a little bit of a scoping death spiral. I don't know, if Joe and Tomas, you experienced that, but, I can't tell you how many pitches I've been on. I'm not necessarily just speaking of my current agency, but it's a trend I've seen over time where, strategy is core to winning the pitch. And then you get the first staffing plan back and they've put 5% of a strategist in the plan. And yet there's 6 account people. And I love my brethren in account management, but they write the scopes. They make sure their people are in there. And as I've seen a decline in the allocation of strategists, people are having to be an inch deep and a mile wide. They're not able to spend as much time on any one thing. They're bouncing back and forth between things. And with a setup like that, of course, their contribution is going to be pretty substantively diluted. I'm curious if you guys see that.
I think I think the point about clients loving it in the pitch is so true. And it's like you can have a client drooling over the strategy in a pitch and you win the thing. And then it comes to scoping it out and they're like, well, we've got the thinking now. We don't need you to generate any more evidence that you've done it because we know you've done it because we've seen it. And I think strategy, and this is going to get so much harder with AI now, strategy's always had an issue of you kind of give the thinking away for free, but then you charge for evidence that you've done the thinking. And I'm not sure if anyone's got the answer yet. Is it to charge for the thinking itself, or is it to maybe find ways to kind of squeeze the evidence production component of it? So yeah, definitely something that I'm seeing a lot.
Yeah, but this could be an explanation for why we found that 62% of the strategists we surveyed said they think strategy is treated as cuttable or expendable when budgets are tight. And so this could be what's pushing people to doing more of the downstream tasks. But Elizabeth, I know you were helping the 4As, you and Tomas are helping the 4As put together StratFest's agenda this year, and the theme is a little on the mark. It's called Adapt or Die. So how do you see the community sort of addressing these challenges of like what we're doing about how we present strategy and the value that it adds?
Yeah, again, like it's such an annoying strategist quirk to question the question a little bit. But when I saw that statistic around strategists feeling expendable, I couldn't help but wonder, do you feel the discipline is expendable or are you feeling expendable? Because obviously this is like self-reported data. And, my mind wandered a little bit. I feel like every year or two, a creative will have kind of a hot take. They'll create a deck or they'll have a post about how strategists are just the worst and it's all bullshit and they do this and they don't do this. But it's always with a caveat that's like, well, except for Joe. Joe's great. And then, in the flame wars in the comments where, a copywriter and art director are like, yeah, they're the worst. They're like, well, except for Tomas. Tomas is pretty great too. And also Britton on my team is great. And so on and so forth. And I have been at agencies where strategy was revered, where you walked in with a level of credibility just because you were a strategist. That has more often been true when strategy at that agency is a really hard job to get. And the expectation of excellence is really, really high and you have to live up to it every day. I've also worked, inside agencies, both full-time and freelance, where I walked in and on the first day they were like, hey, just a heads up, the CCO really doesn't love strategists and don't take it personally if you're not included. And just with my personality, I'm like, challenge accepted. And in those instances, I've seen the same CCO who hated strategy and hated strategists, walk in skeptically. And then after a great brief or a great insight or a great platform or helping save a piece of work or convince a client, be like, well, actually, now I want you in every meeting. Now I want you sitting with the copywriter and writing lines. Now I want you in the edit, in extreme cases, to hold the client's hand and make sure the right cut goes through. And I just find that when we talk about strategists monolithically, you kind of lump in a lot of maybe bad behavior or in some instances like mediocrity or variation from the mean. And I think my encourages to the strategists who are feeling that way is that you always have the power to walk into a room, whether it's inside an agency or with a client, and supersede those low expectations. And we forget sometimes that regardless of like the position you play on the field, this is a team sport. And if you're a really good individual contributor and you're a really good teammate, you will not be cuttable. Like they will want you on every brief. They will want you in every phone call. They will find room for you in the scope. And so that maybe doesn't solve the problem for everyone, but for any of the strategists in that 62% feeling really discouraged, I think my encouragement would be that like you individually can always change that dynamic first for yourself and then for others by being really freaking great at your job. So anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of where my mind went.
And I would say it's like the point of like adapt or die. I think what I think really matters to us with this year's edition of the conference is to think about like what what should and could this profession look like in the next 5 years? I mean, we're midway through the 20s, and I think it's the kind of it makes sense to look at, we need to support and nurture the fundamentals of strategy and strategic thinking. We need to embrace technology, but where are we really going? And I think at the core of it is, I think, an acknowledgement that, I think technology and Gen AI can very quickly get a lot of people to the same starting point, where if you feel like you understand the category enough, you understand the dynamics enough. And unless, to Elizabeth's point, I think unless you're really good at your craft, you can start to look like an AI output very quickly. And I think that's where the difference happens. I think there is people who are talented, who love their craft and use the technology, will adapt, and I think will have their weight in gold, right? Because I think that's ultimately what the marketer wants. They want someone that can simplify, create a compass, and kind of guide the creativity to a place that creates growth for brand. If you don't do that, then I think, unfortunately, like the mediocre output can be automated, I think, a lot more effectively. So I think I think it's potentially optimistic, but I think probably if your heart's not in it, then I think it's quite rough.
And wouldn't you say also that like great insights have always been few and far between? Like great strategists who can deliver an incredible insight that makes you rethink things. Like that's always been kind of rarefied air. I mean, in theory, it's like the aim of every strategist, but not everyone gets there. Like I was working on a project earlier today where I was combing through some research reports through a synthetic data partner. And, on one hand, all of this is nascent and is getting better fast all the time. And I'm sure that where this partner will get with outputs in 3 months or 6 months or 2 years is very different than where we are now. But as I went through the data, I was like, well, there's still a role for strategists to take this very long report of meh and turn it into something interesting. And it's not that different than all the human quantitative research companies that have delivered something that was meh. And the role of the strategist was to take that information and turn it into insight, to take the what and explain the so what. And I think you're exactly right, Tomas. Like the phoning it in job of strategy, like that job's done. That can be quickly automated. But that final few feet of kind of transmogrifying straw into gold or taking a stat and turning it into an insight, I think that is only more important and probably going to increase in importance.
I do think that's really pertinent to what you were saying earlier, though, Elizabeth, about the scoping issue. We've actually just built an AI tool that goes away and it scrapes Reddit. You program into this platform that we've made, and it will go and look for the things that you told it to, and it will come back with 30, 40 Reddit posts that are grouped into categories, and it's pretty creative in how it will look in different subreddits and find things. So it's very, very useful. And it's really good at finding the things and saying, okay, maybe there's a theme in this. It's not so great at telling you why these things are useful or related, but it kind of says, okay, we've noticed this thing over here and this thing over here. And I think back to that point about scoping, it's taken the 25 hours of work of scraping Reddit and crushed it into 25 seconds. That was never the bit where the value was created, though. That was the evidence that you needed to communicate the insight. And I think that crunch is the difficult bit. Is how do you charge for the moment of inspiration that is 5 minutes of sitting, scratching your head in the morning, and you can no longer charge for the 25 hours of somebody scraping forums,
It's a really good point.
Exactly. It's a question of like how are we asking for the work to be paid for, which is a very business model problem. But I'm also interested in talking about like what AI can do versus what humans can do. And I know Tomas wrote an article for us where he talks about if strategy becomes indistinguishable from AI outputs, then agencies lose their most valuable multiplier, which is human judgment, creativity, and emotional resonance. So, how can the industry or maybe individual strategists invest in the skills they need to deliver things like judgment, creativity, and emotional resonance?
Well, I think it starts from a place of probably the best strategy talent might not be inside creative agencies right now or anymore. I think they probably work in marketing organizations. They have dedicated practices. And I think that is because, I think to our earlier conversation with Joe and Elizabeth, I think we have become so focused on time, so focused on kind of structuring these like large pyramid style teams that we perhaps forgot, how to position a talent as like the best strategic partner to our clients. I think it starts from a place of, I think we need to some extent, kind of recast creative agencies as the place where best strategic talent can actually be successful. And I think at the heart of that is we just need to fix the talent problem. I think we are not making the connection between training investment and nurturing of our people with talent retention and acquisition costs. We are not necessarily, I'll use like a kind of maybe basic metaphor. I think if we treat the strategists as athletes that need long-term contracts, incentives, investment into their fitness routine, into their recovery, into changing positions so that you don't end up doing the same job in 2-year increments over a 10-year span, as Christopher Owens would say. It's something, I think, instead of kind of going on a journey to building your specialism, you just keep doing the same thing over and over again. Then I think we can be onto something. But I'd probably start with just like a little archaeology. The way I see it, it's I think mentorship and training has been kind of hollowed out even before COVID. And then I think during the pandemic, I think we've become this kind of task-oriented, meeting-led machines that support brands and support their objectives. But this idea of how creativity happens, how you struggle your way to an idea, to an insight, how you align everyone, how you get the agency really excited, how you get the marketing organization really bought into an idea. I think that sort of a culture has gone away a little bit. And I think because of that, I think a lot of the output feels like it can be replaced with AI because it's kind of okay. It kind of gets the job done, but it can be replaced. So if I were to kind of think of like how to reboot this, because I think it's a real problem. I think in the way we think about our talent ladder, our talent pipelines, how we reward our people, how we even keep our people, Joe, to your point of like how do we scope it, I wish that we start with just like a culture of belonging. I think if we all kind of be in it together more and cheer each other on and more liberally and generously share what is successful for us individually, for our agencies, I think as a community, I think we would do much better. And then I think at a personal level, I think each of us need to have a kind of vision for ourselves. Like I use this, like, it's like really sweet, like, 1,000-year-old, like Japanese way of thinking about your own purpose in life, ikigai. I think it's really powerful because it helps you to just shape like, what am I great at and what does the market actually want and what kind of creates good in the world as well. And I think each of us need to have a plan for that, because if we don't ask for what we want our lives and our careers to look like, then how can the company know what to invest in as well? So I think in my mind, it's a complex problem, but I think there is a way out of it. I think this industry is full of really talented people, but we do need to, I think, collectively hold hands and rediscover the power of our community, of mentorship, of training, and everything that comes with that.
Are you searching for pricing data that keeps your brand ahead of the curve? Acuity Pricing's competitor price tracking, promotions, and proposition tools help the UK's biggest brands act with speed, scale, and confidence, providing real-time quality data sent straight to where you need it when you need it. It's why 7 out of the UK's 10 biggest retailers and more than 60 global brands trust Acuity Pricing to get the job done. Check out acuitypricing.com to book a demo and get started.
One of the things that keeps resonating through my head as I've been looking at these results of the Future of Strategy survey is this line from a Leonard Cohen song that says, "There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." So I'm really thinking about like, okay, where's the light? Where are the opportunities? Where do we go from here? And Joe, you also wrote an article for us, and you're talking about how the focus on efficiency and optimization has led to symmetry everywhere, but not a lot of winning. So let's just talk a little bit about strategy being the way brands can find an advantage over competitors, or how brands can win.
Yeah, I think this builds on a few of the themes that we've just been chatting about, actually. I think a lot of that comes down to maybe over the last 10 years, there's been this shift towards advertising as process. It's like if you go through these steps and you perform these specific operations on the information you have access to and everyone has access to, you'll get to a thing and you put your brand in the first 6 seconds of the ad and you go through all these steps and you will get to a satisfactory output. I think what's happened is that's just kind of gone turbo, and it's got to the point where everyone's just trying to do things as efficiently as possible. So everyone's playing by a similar playbook with access to the same open data, procedurally operating on that data in similar ways with similar beliefs about how advertising works. If you're fortunate enough to see, half a dozen agency cred stacks, you'll see exactly what I mean now. It's not, there's very, very few don't talk about how important standing out is and how it's risky to not do that and things like that. So everyone's kind of converged. And I think the thing that's been forgot is like our job as strategists is kind of to work out where we can break those rules and bend them and do things differently in order to gain competitive advantage. And it's a strange thing to say because I think we tend to, as an industry, we tend to skew towards a bit more of a progressive, liberal point of view on the world. I'm not trying to contradict Thomas here, but I do think there's a case of like, it needs to be quite collegiate and like a competitive culture as well. I think as planners, as strategists, we should be buddies with each other and share what we know and push each other to be better. But at the same time, for our clients, I think we should be saying like, hey, every other brand in the category's got this media mix. What if we did this instead? And kind of threw a spanner in the works there, a wrench for the American listeners, threw a wrench into the machine a little bit. And I think I think that's been lost a little bit in the push for efficiency. Okay, we know we can get a marginal 0.3% lift in the return on advertising spend by doing this. So that precludes us from doing this stuff, which, okay, what if we put 50% of our budget into a radio campaign? That no one else is doing that. What might happen there? So yeah, that's where I think there's real ground to be gained for us if we can pursue that.
And I think one of the other issues that came up through the survey is that this belief that there's just a culture of no one wanting to take risks. The risk averseness of the industry at the moment makes it very hard to sell through a new, innovative, risky idea. Have you guys noticed that as well?
I want to jump on my soapbox at this. This is one thing
Okay.
I could rant about drunkenly in the pub for a long time. I think the agency has a huge issue that it confuses uncertainty and risk. And I think you hear a lot of creatives, I'm not trying to diss creatives, I love creatives, but a lot of them say, oh, clients need to take more risks. Let's be bold, let's be brave. Great creativity is about taking risks. I'm like, is it? Why is taking risks? Why is that good? And I think the confusion is what we're really saying is we need to do things that are uncertain. And I think we need to be much more clear about the difference between risk, which is a known possibility of something bad happening. That we don't want to increase risk. What we need to do is actually find more uncertainty and find more things out. And I think that's a really important change in the discourse that I would like to see away from this kind of risk pushing behavior towards something that's a lot more about saying there's a load of things we do not know. Let's go and find out. I think that's a much more mature attitude to have. Anyway, that's my soapbox at the minute.
I love that. That's a great soapbox.
Joe, I love to me, I think risk and bravery are kind of holding hands together as they walk into any creative review, because I completely agree with you. I think this notion of, being brave, I think we're confusing with, breakthrough, right? And I think that's what we're looking for. Like, we're looking not for incrementality, but something that maybe hasn't been proven yet, but we have confidence and every intention to break from a category norm, to break through the clutter, to break through the slope. So I love the notion of like how we can change the narrative, because I think that's where you can actually escape that flattening of the playbooks and of consumer behavior and of content. So let's do it.
One of the other aspects of the survey that came out was that strategists are saying they want to use their time for more nuanced, deeper strategic thinking, but we're seeing less time spent on upstream planning. But one of the things I know we hear from clients is they really, as you said in the beginning of this conversation, that they really do want that strategic thinking. How do we get to a point where we're actually doing that work? The strategists are doing that work, like looking at the bigger view of like, where does this business sit? Where does it have its advantages? Where does it have its disadvantages? How can it like put itself in the category in a place that's unique and will break through? Like, how do you think we get to the point where that's the norm?
Funnily, Anne-Marie, when you were saying, where does the light get in? I think that is where the light gets in, to be honest. Like, some of the tasks that were more monotonous and took a lot more time are things that AI can quickly solve. And in a perfect world, that does give us more time for deeper thinking, more creative thinking, more upstream thinking, because some of the tyranny of the urgent can be digitized, and a very simple example. Funnily, I did some focus groups for my husband over Christmas. He works in the nonprofit strategy space. And so he was like, all right, you have 2 weeks off. I'm gonna put you to work. But for the sake of our marital bliss, didn't want to make that bit so heavy a lift for me. And so he used AI. He took a stab at a questionnaire, and then I got to tweak the questionnaire, like, a little junior planner, and I got to, go in there and tweak it. And then we recorded the focus groups. They were with nonprofit leaders. Used AI to create a transcript, fed the transcript into ChatGPT. ChatGPT gave us an initial report, and then I went through the report and I sculpted and I edited and I figured out what was right or wrong. It was the first time I had done that, and it's funny that it was in a personal capacity, not really a work capacity. And I thought back to, like, early in my career, I worked on Walmart and we were repositioning it from always low prices to save money, live better. And I thought about how many hours and hours and hours I spent taking notes in those focus groups, and then or taking a report and turning it into an insight. And all of that was flattened. And so, much has been written, and I think will continue to, about the fact that, well, that used to be a junior strategist job. And so what does that mean? I would argue it means that junior strategists now get to do new things. And maybe they don't have to spend all their time doing a focus group report, because that is easily digitized. But I do think how many things in the average scope, if that can kind of be automated, we do get more time back for deep thinking, thinking that helps our clients win, thinking that's more divergent, more creative, et cetera. So I actually think that is where the light, where the crack comes in with AI. Maybe we get to automate some of the things that frankly aren't the highest and best use of a strategist mind. And then we get to major in the majors. That's my Pollyanna hope anyway.
I mean, I would also say that, if we are not getting the upstream strategy questions, then those problems are being solved elsewhere. And clients are not coming to us for that. Because I think, some of the conversations that I've had is, I think clients get to keep the fun stuff. Like, the marketers get to keep the big meaty problems to themselves, and because that's enjoyable. Like, what they do tend to pass to creative agencies in particular, the annoying problems. I think things that, like, they wouldn't necessarily want to do themselves. Like, give me the annoying stuff. And I think what sits on our shoulders is, I think we need to create an environment where marketers feel comfortable coming into with the big problems, with the big decisions that they need to make, knowing that they're entering a culture and an environment and a team of people that is super smart, highly informed, on the pulse of culture, but also can give them all the tools to create a confidence internally to then make those big bets. Because they are making big bets. Every one of our clients is making those big bets, but creative agencies might not be part of that conversation right now. So I think the early point of, like, rebranding, recasting who we are, I think it starts with creating an environment that is welcoming to clients, but it also gives them, like, the platform from which they can actually dream big and decide on big things.
Yeah, one of the other interesting things in the survey was that the independent strategists were doing a lot of the upstream business planning, and out much more than the inside agency strategists, which I thought was interesting because it shows that there is a need for it. It's just apparently not clear how you get it from the agency anymore, or the way the agency is presenting it is seeds. I don't know. I just found that interesting that the need is still there for sure. Um, so anyway, another thing I want to talk to you guys about is that the survey identified 3 opportunities that the strategists saw. The top 3 opportunities going forward was help clients navigate industry disruption and identify growth opportunities, develop a cohesive brand strategy across multiple platforms and touch points, and challenge safe conventional thinking to drive more creative work. And we've touched a little bit on all 3 of these. So I'm wondering, does this jibe with what you guys are seeing? And are there anything else that you would add into that list of new opportunities?
I'd say that that definitely jives with what I see for sure. The one thing though that I would highlight is, and to the point that you were just making about independent strategists, sometimes you run into what I would call the deliverables dilemma. And I think a lot of the time, if you get an RFP or a brief that comes into the agency and there's a list of assets that you need to fulfill, your hands are a little bit tied of what you can do as a strategist from the office. Like, okay, I know the client's got this media plan that needs to be fulfilled. Really, you kind of stop doing strategy and you start doing messaging definition, I think is a good way to put it, with like, okay, let's come up with the right messaging and what insight can we have that's going to help this creative cut through. And to this, 'cause this is the second point that you made on those bullet points, which is like, it's so complicated now, a consumer journey, and the number of touch points that a brand can show up in, and the ways a brand needs to manifest, and the places where creativity can theoretically come to life are so huge. And in my opinion, the biggest opportunities for step changing what you can do in terms of just sheer like value for money of investment in doing something creative, they're off the beaten track of a standard media plan. I think over the last 50 years, we've probably got about as good as we're ever going to get at making TV advertising. Maybe the next one will be 2% better than the last one. But there's so many spaces like off the beaten plan where we can deliver really, really smart, creative, business changing ideas. But if you get a deliverables list that comes through the door and it's TV, digital radio, some banner ads, you can't take the creativity to that place. So I think that's the thing that I think really needs to happen in order for us to unlock the value in those things. It's like we need to think maybe Naked were 15 years too early, and we need something like that to swing into the agency world and kind of disrupt the media thinking maybe a little bit.
I love that. I mean, Joe, it reminds me of the comment you made earlier when, Tomas, you have this beautiful vision of, belonging and so on and so forth, which on one hand, I do believe that like fear is the death of creativity. And so spaces like that, you give us the freedom we need to have big, wild ideas and so on and so forth. But kind of on the other side where you were, Joe, I do sometimes wonder if we need to be a little hungrier, as a wider discipline. Because I think that is what the next era of strategy is probably going to require. You know, the reality is like we don't really know or have full imagination for what this business transformation is going to look like for our own category, let alone the categories that we serve with our clients. I think back to this is being compared to not even just the industrial revolution, but like tenfold the economic transformation that happened in the industrial revolution. People on the front end of that transformation didn't have imagination for factories with lights, let alone, factories with robots, right? And so multiply that across every sector of the economy. In some ways, in eras of seismic change, maps are not going to do you much good because the maps are all going to change. You need a compass. And so I feel like strategists having a posture of being hungry, humble, and smart, always looking for ways to win, willing to evolve our tactics, constantly questioning how might I tackle this differently? Where can I add value, et cetera? Like maybe what I'm describing is like kind of guerrilla warfare, kamikaze strategy, but I just think that's what it's going to look like for the next few years, probably in any sector for people, who are going to be successful. But I think for our sector in particular, if strategy is an informed opinion on how to win, like the old maps on how to win aren't going to work anymore. And I totally agree with you, Joe. Like if you ever had someone slip you another agency's cred stack, it's like, man, as proud as we all are of our positionings, let's be really clear. We're all cooking with the same 5 ingredients, right? And so I think that type of like curiosity and openness and willing to continue to just like reinvent and evolve towards productivity is probably what we're all going to have to do.
Along with WARC's Future Strategy Survey, Joe, I know you recently went out and surveyed your connections. You did your own What Are People Thinking survey not too long ago. And one finding that you had was that the antidote to strategies malaise lies in reframing the problem and a sharp, single minded brief. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, like, I know, Joe, you said, like, if you get the list in already of what you have to work with, you can't really go outside of that. So what can we do to talk about like improving briefs or thinking about briefs before they become the brief that you have to follow? What are your thoughts on what we can do about that process.
Yeah, I was really pleasantly surprised by those answers coming through in the survey, because I think I've always kind of felt that defining the problem is probably the most valuable thing that strategy does. It's the one bit where I think people most appreciate it, and I think the survey kind of confirmed that. It's like people are, oh, thank God you've taken this big hairy knotty ball of different things, and you've actually just found the one missing screw in all of that. That if we fix this, everything will be great. So like people really appreciate it, which is nice. And to the points we've talked about already, it's like strategy isn't always the most appreciated thing, but when you do it well, it is. So that's nice. But I actually think it's where you've got the biggest scope to actually shift and change what the output is going to be like. I think a lot of junior, and I did this when I was a junior planner, tried to get my fingers into the creative work and have lots of opinions about what the creative work should be. And I think that's always going to rub people up the wrong way, even if you're good at it. And that probably rubs people up the wrong way even more, actually. But reframing the problem and finding just a different thing to point creativity at, that's what people want from us. And I think like we should be spending more time on that. And the thing that makes that tricky is that involves much more scrutiny of the brief that you get. You know what I mean? It's not just about taking the brief that's given to you and going, okay, let's develop this messaging, let's develop this XYZ thing around it. You kind of have to not just question the brief, but you kind of have to get up in the client's business a little bit and be like, oh, hey, but how does your revenue work on this part of the website? And how does this thing work over here? And like, it's the bit that forces you to go out and back to the thing about symmetry and asymmetry. In order to reframe the problem, you kind of need to go to places where you have to turn over some rocks that other people haven't turned over yet. And I think that's why it's so exciting for me.
Joe, do you find, and Tomas, this question to you as well, some of it sometimes depends on the size and structure of the marketing organization, right? So like, if you are working with a large, and this is not an indictment on CPG, but I just use CPG because when you think about professionalized marketing services, the CPG is kind of considered, the classical training on the brand side. It is in some ways so professionalized, so mechanized, so systematized that I have to imagine if you're challenging the brief at times, there are some marketers who are open to that and others who are like, for God's sake, please just give me the thing I asked for. I don't have time for this. I know what I need, just go figure out how to do it. Sometimes it can be really fun working with smaller marketing organizations, not in terms of necessarily even the size of the company, but the size of the team. Like an example that comes to mind is I'm working with I'll say sports league right now. And they want to recruit 10 million new players to their sport in the next 10 years. Well, that's a really fun brief, but it's also a small team. And so we were able to have conversations about like, okay, well, what does it mean to recruit them? Are they playing one time a year? Are they playing 50 times a year? And, when I really track out like 2 million, sourcing 2 million players a year for the next 10 years, there's so many fun ways you can do that, And I think sometimes on a smaller marketing organization or a differently structured team that's maybe less professionalized in the way they mechanistically get work done, there's more space to say, okay, I see what you're going for. Let's talk about 5 different ways to get there. And sometimes it's actually the bigger, more professionalized, I guess the podcast listeners can't see me making air quotes, organizations where there's less room to have those conversations to figure out what winning really looks like and if there might be a more interesting or more effective way to get there. Do you guys find that?
Well, it's like I love what you're saying, because to me, a powerful brief, it's not a form to fill, it's a tool to focus. And I think specifically focus where to win. And I think that's where the most productive partnership is between marketers and agencies can happen. Like true conversation about how we're going to win, where it's going to happen, and can we commit to this singular focus in how we go about doing that?
Yeah, so one of the other aspects that we're going to see at StratFest is this idea that hybrid briefs work for immediate sales and long-term memory building. And of course, this is something that's very close to WARC's heart, given that this year we've put out the multiplier effect, and we're really doing a big push to get people to think about creating integrated marketing teams and marketing plans and really integrate your marketing and do away with the silos. And to your point, Elizabeth, sometimes when you have a bigger, more professional organization, it's harder to do away with those silos. So let's talk a little bit about like how can we to think about the long and the short. How can we get that idea out when you're working with clients, and what resistance do you see when you talk about that?
I mean, I feel like this is such a stereotypical answer, but some of it depends on where you sit on the bus as the we, right? So if you're an AOR, if you're a long-term partner, or you're an IAT lead, or, so on and so forth, you have more opportunity to think about platforms that drive not just marketing, but drive innovation and drive culture and drive other things. Like, when you have kind of the luxury of being embedded over time, you really can be that long-term business partner. I think the challenge is, and some of it really depends on the marketing organization. Like, we're lucky that we still have majority AORs and a lot of long-term partnerships. And so we do have people who like know the business as well as they do. Maybe we're the ones who onboard new clients because we've got the institutional knowledge over time. Like, and I think in those longitudinal relationships, it is easier to think about whether it's a hybrid brief or just a more holistic way of thinking about how to grow their business. It is much harder when you are being treated like a vendor or a widget, where they're not paying for that kind of thinking. They're not asking for that type of thinking. They may or may not be open to that type of thinking. And I can think of a brand I worked with, and I love the brand and I like the people individually. But historically, they had not worked with agencies. They had just worked with like fashion production companies. So they weren't used to strategy. They weren't used to, the creative partner also having business ideas or anything like that. And we worked together for a few years, and it was always a little bit of like a square peg in a round hole, where they were like, why are you thinking we're not asking you to think like that. And organizationally, they didn't know what to do with that kind of thinking because they just, dispositionally don't work that way. And so in some ways, I love the utopic vision of like a hybrid brief that's guiding everything. If you're a marketer, I think that's really valuable. Or if you're a long-term or like an IAT type partner, I think it's really valuable. But I think my caveat would be so many agencies and so many strategists don't have the luxury or the time or the seat at the table to be the quarterback of that brief.
I'd love to just build on that a little bit, because I think one of the biggest keys to the kingdom, let's call it, that being that longitudinal partner gives you is access to metrics and measurement. And I think there too, that metrics and measurement is something that maybe because it's so uncool, let's be honest, it's probably the least cool part of what we do is in our jobs. It's really fallen off the agenda a little bit. I mean, just as a thought experiment, imagine the exact same brief. One version has media mix modeling as the metrics. The other one has last click attribution. The right answer to those two briefs could not be more different. But that box with how this is going to be measured, that's not the first thing we're discussing as strategists. Well, oh, the audience is here, and the audience is this. And I think there needs to be a much more firm and reasoned, and right back to what we were talking about, talent levels. People need to really reflexively understand what these measurements do to the campaigns that get measured, because I think they shape the work far more than it appears to be so when you're looking at, a box on a brief from a client. This is how we're going to measure this. So I think it does cut that's downstream a little bit of those big having that relationship with the client, but it's something that I think agencies really need to have a much better understanding of how important measurement is to clients and how much it affects the kind of work they're going to buy.
I mean, Joe, I don't think it's downstream. I think it's absolutely fundamental, because it points to, like, how are we actually scoring our own work and how are we achieving net positive outcomes for clients, right? Because I think, Anne-Marie, even to your point on like hybrid briefs and the multiplier effect, I think it's a fantastic report, and I think it does a great job of explaining how effective marketing happens and how it works. And I think agencies, I think sometimes we do a good job of repeating that exact thought leadership to clients, but we don't necessarily complete the thought of why hire us? Why specifically this team? Why specifically our point of view allows you to win and achieve positive outcomes? Because I think within that, you can have the conversation about the balance of brand and performance, and we all know what the data looks like by category, by maturity of that category, all of that. But I think having the point of view, I think, Joe, to your point, it's like, actually, we will obsess about measurement because that's what's going to achieve the outcome. I think that's where we kind of leave it to marketers to make up their own mind versus us being more, Elizabeth, to your point, kind of hungry and saying, actually, with us, you will achieve twice as better of an outcome as you would with any other partner in the market.
Oh, this has been great. Thank you so much for all of you joining me today because I really appreciate it. I love this conversation. I loved all the passion that you brought to the conversation. So thanks so much for that. Just any last thoughts that anyone wants to add before we go? Is there anything that you think we touched on that you wanted to go a little deeper on, or?
I mean, I might add a hopeful concluding thought. I don't know if other people have their own, and then if you guys want to revisit something, we certainly can. So fun fact, I'm from South Carolina. I'm from Charleston. The state motto is Dum Spiro Spero, which means while I breathe, I hope. And so I tend to be someone as a life motto that is like, I always will, bend towards the sun. But I think that this industry will always have a place for smart people who will solve problems at the end of the day. And whether or not it feels like your discipline, isn't getting the respect that it ought to, or, we're not being scoped. These problems are real. I'm not whistling past the graveyard on any of these things, but, chaos is a ladder and everybody is figuring out what this evolution looks like. And I think for people who are willing to lean in and roll up their sleeves and add value and be flexible and help our agencies and our marketing partners figure it out, I think there will always be a seat at the table. And so I have a lot of hope, whether it's for strategy as a discipline or strategists in the industry. I think people like that will always have value.
Hope we're recording this. I think it'd be good because I could easily play this in my next team meeting, Elizabeth.
It's never been as easy as now to make stuff, and connect with people and actually create outputs. I think that solves maybe what was always to me the most frustrating part of being a strategist, which was like other people get to make things, which seemed like the most fun bit. And now it's really, really easy. You can set up a Substack, you can set up a podcast, you can make visual infographic, you can do whatever you want. So you can have your insights and come up with your ideas, and you can connect with other people who might be interested in them. And I just really want to encourage everyone to do that because you learn more doing that and you find other people who are interested in stuff. So take advantage of the tools that are now available.
For curious minds, this is the best time to be in our industry. I think we just need to be fearless, ingenious, and look after each other. I'll keep that community point going. I think if we cheer each other on, I think we'll do great.
That's terrific. Thank you, you guys. This was great.
Amazing. Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, Tomas, and Joe for joining us today. This was really great. I'm Anne-Marie Kerwin, WARC's America's editor. Be sure to subscribe to the WARC Podcast so you don't miss our other future strategy podcasts in the series, as well as the many other excellent podcasts hosted by my fellow WARC editors. Thanks for listening.